Ananda Bhoumik of India Ratings has also joined us. Ananda, there is some major point that the Reserve Bank has made, saying that credit rating agencies may indulge in rating shopping, and they may also have a conflict of interest. So they are exploring the feasibility of rating assignment being determined by RBI itself and paid for from a fund created by contribution from the various banks. Your thoughts?
I think this line is presumably in the context of the previous sentence, which has said that rating agencies would be involved,
yes,
wherever required to examine.
They envisage an important role for rating agencies.
Yes, and I think the aim is to infuse some amount of transparency and objectivity to the extent that agencies can in this exercise, to determine what is the level of sustainable debt. So it's an independent third-party view on what that level could be. And then how that's cured is, of course, you're right, it's a function of what are the instruments that get defined, whether it's a write-off, is it a haircut, or whether it's a senior sub structure. All that, I presume, the market or the banks can arrive at. In terms of rating shopping conflict of interest, of course, that's a bigger debate on which I don't want to comment too much upon. But I think what RBI wishes to set up is less of a mechanism which is where the bankers decide which agencies they choose, and more of a mechanism wherein RBI sort of allocates work to whichever agency they feel are competent to exercise this, and to avoid any possible conflict of interest because bankers and issuers are involved, there's a centralized. Now, this model, of course, of an issuer paid or a banker paid model has really not been tried out anywhere before, so it's probably going to be a first time, and I'm sure everybody would watch with interest. In theory.
1 minute, Ananda, you understand this line to mean that RBI will decide which rating agency will rate a particular resolution mechanism?
So that could be one of the ways, because it's
how did you understand it? Will they set up a separate rating body?
No, I think they obviously plan to tap into the pools of expertise that already exist. Now, exploring the feasibility of assignments being determined by the RBI itself leads me to think that they would decide which are the pools of expertise that they would tap in. At this point, they have identified rating agencies as possibly doing this. So I'm guessing that RBI would think of how to direct these assignments to rating agencies, depending upon.
What would be the requirement of that fund to be created for? I mean, what do you reckon that fund will be used for? To pay the rating agencies? Is that what the Reserve Bank of India is perhaps referring to?
Prima facie, this is what this paragraph refers to. I mean, it's not that rating agencies' fees are a large part, but whatever that be, RBI is envisaging that there be no conflict of interest. So later on, and this is precisely the point that you were making earlier, 2 years later, in case these things don't work out, there be no charges levied, saying that accusations levied, saying that rating agencies were paid by the banks, and so therefore maybe there was a conflict. So here you have a structure where agencies were being paid by an independent fund, and so therefore any potential conflict didn't arise.
That certainly puts things in better perspective. But Mr. Mittal, how would you understand this? I'll just read that sentence to you, and in a bit we'll also be joined by Mr. Puri. The Reserve Bank envisages an important role for credit rating agencies in the scheme of things, and with a view to preventing rating shopping or any conflict of interest, is exploring the feasibility of rating assignments being determined by the Reserve Bank itself and paid for from a fund to be created out of contribution from banks and RBI. Mr. Mittal, your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. What comments have been made on this, that RBI is not intending to set up any new agency. What they're saying is the assignment of tasks or assignment of any project or any appraisal will be given by this committee or this by the RBI and be paid out of the fund, so that these agencies are under no obligation to toe the line of the banker or the promoter who would have otherwise paid them. So it's a very fair way of doing it. But I'd like to comment on one thing we had a debate. See, the role of these supervisory committees is twofold. One, the present guidelines of the RBI are not accepted by everybody. The framework is not accepted by all banks together. And also it is not accepted or not decided in a timely manner. So these committees will do, supervisory committee will do this task. Secondly, the evolution of guidelines is a continuous process. As RBI will get a feedback, they will involve the guidelines. But today, with 50% debtors, the creditors being there, they agreeing, then everybody has to fall in line. Even that doesn't happen. So the preparation of the plan with 50% creditors being there, and then also a compliance for the rest is very important, which I think can be done by the supervisory committees without any conflict of interest. That's why I'm saying that the conflict of interest, if these committees go beyond this point, if they only see this much, then there is no conflict of interest. This is supervisory action which RBI should do.
Okay. Well, Mr. Leo Puri has also joined us, and I'll just use this opportunity to revise the decisions put out by the Reserve Bank today. The Reserve Bank says, following the ordinance, of course, it announced a lot of measures to tighten the JLF system itself. But at the moment, today, the decisions announced, Mr. Puri, more for your benefit as well, is one, that the oversight committee under IBA will now become an oversight committee under RBI. It will be expanded and will be allowed to set up more benches so that cases can be speedily disposed. Two, it is working on a framework to facilitate which cases will go to the insolvency code and how. It also is looking at the current guidelines on restructuring. It is examining them for whatever modifications that may be needed. My sense is that's what the bankers are waiting for very eagerly. But all that RBI says is that it's examining the current restructuring mechanisms for modification. They're also envisaging using rating agencies in a big way for the restructured assets. And to prevent rating shopping, the RBI is exploring the feasibility of rating assignments being determined by the RBI itself. So RBI assigns the rating, it appears, and it is paid for from a fund created by banks and RBI. Finally, RBI says that it will coordinate with ARCs, the IBBI, the board of the insolvency board, PE firms, rating agencies, and it will hold a lot of meetings with these stakeholders for a quick resolution of NPLs. Mr. Puri, well, what do you think is one or two of these steps which will speed up resolution?
Well, Lata, first of all, I think this is a very far-reaching and a very practical first step that is being taken here. In some ways, what is happening is you're actually seeing the beginnings of a state-sponsored resolution process. I just picked up a little bit of the debate around whether, there's a conflict of interest. The regulator itself ends up being in charge of the resolution process. And I guess that's a fair question, but frankly, it's a little moot at this point because you have to work with what we have. And given that the RBI has been designated as that agency, I think we should move forward from here. It certainly, from what I could gather, is the RBI has the potential to somewhat insulate itself. It could perhaps set up in the way that Indonesia did an Indonesian bank restructuring agency, which is linked but not identical with the regulatory functions that it performs. So my bottom line is that this is a welcome recognition that you actually need a top-down, state-sponsored resolution process. I would almost go so far as to say that this is a sort of virtual bad bank without the capitalization, which is, of course, a very important element of a bad bank. But the processes that I've seen described, and I've also just quickly been reading it, and I see the term flexible restructuring. So in addition to S4A and so on, it seems to leave open a set of mechanisms.
Yep.
So now you have a process where I can actually staff an entity, an agency, and I think ideally the RBI should create a separate agency within its overall umbrella and not commingle it with its ongoing duties. You have the capacity to staff that. You have processes that you can now work on resolution, and you have been given powers in the ordinance to force through decision-making in timelines that we have not seen in the past.
So that is not the task of the OC. You are envisaging a separate committee which will put across this framework.
I'm envisaging a situation where the RBI has now been handed, fundamentally, the responsibility for leading the top-down resolution of the bad loan process. The OC is a part of that mechanism, frankly. But if you read what this note says, it gives a lot of leeway to the RBI to identify and define further processes to enable this. And this is therefore the first step. Essentially, it's handing the mandate to the RBI. The OC is taking care of the issue of accountability and so on per se, which is a peculiar issue for the public sector banks. And I'm sure it will serve that purpose. But it's much more than that. It's actually, for the first time, a single entity which will have the consolidated and different powers that currently reside in the different schemes that they've announced, the ability to enforce the IBC, the mandate from the Government of India, being able to work directly with Ministry of Finance, and of course all the other market-driven agencies that you were just mentioning, including rating agencies, bringing in capital from ARCs, incentivizing PE firms. So it could be the beginning of something quite interesting. And I'm sure the RBI will give a lot of thought to how they want to organize, if you like, to execute this mandate.
Okay. Just to sum up, Mr. Puri, you therefore expect what as next steps from the RBI? One, it will announce a framework whereby cases are sent to the insolvency code or not. Two, it will have another committee which will look at the various restructuring mechanisms. What exactly are the next 1, 2, 3 steps that the Reserve Bank will do?
Well, that's a matter of speculation, but I think it's clear to me that the mandate they have is more than simply setting up the committees, if you like. It goes beyond that. It is to actually create the entire framework now for the accelerated resolution of bad debt. It is in that sense, as I said, a substitute for a virtual sovereign bad bank minus the capital. All of the processes that a bad bank, a sovereign bad bank, sovereign resolution process would carry out have essentially been mandated to the RBI. It's a very broad mandate, and I think one which holds out a lot of promise. Okay. How they will go about organizing themselves to deliver on this, I think, is something that's probably exercising them right now. But I see it as a very positive step forward. If you had a clean sheet, of course, you could have designed it differently.
Yeah,
but frankly, the time is gone for that, and I wouldn't take up too much time now. I say, given this is the sheet of paper we have, and we have to work with this, let's quickly move ahead and organize now to execute around it.
Okay, sir. Actually, we have run out of